You're watching the YouTube version of the We Are Innovation podcast. Join us as we explore how innovation, new technologies, and human creativity improve our lives. The future is calling.
Hi, I am Federico Fernández. Welcome to a new episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Today we'll have a conversation on a very important topic because we'll talk on mental health issues. And for that, I am accompanied by Máté Hajba. Máté is the director of the Free Market Foundation, an organization that advocates economic freedom, civil rights, and tolerance. He's also the vice president of the Civic Platform, which runs an anti-racist campaign and promotes democratic values. Máté is interested in the relationship between the state and the individual, and in the concept of history of liberty. He writes for the international press as well as for Hungarian press whenever he has the opportunity. I'll leave links where you can find more about the work of Máté and the Free Market Foundation. And also, we're very happy because the Free Market Foundation has recently joined We Are Innovation and has become our first Hungarian partner. Máté, welcome to the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor being here and being part of the We Are Innovation Network.
Thank you, Máté. We're very happy, and also we really appreciate your time. You just got back from holidays, as you told us. So thank you. Let's hope this doesn't stress you too much after the holiday recess. That you look very rested. I want to firstly start asking you about the general work and mission of the Free Market Foundation, and particularly because I find this part of your work fascinating. I mean, your work is very good, but this part, how the mental health issues that you're studying as well, you're making part of your work, how mental health fits into your broader vision and the broader work of the Free Market Foundation.
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and we didn't set off doing this. I just realized, having been active for over 10 years now, that many of the work we are doing is somehow even only tangentially related to mental health. So originally, we were founded to promote classical liberal values in Hungary. We are doing it in Hungary, and we have also international projects. We have done pro-free market advocacy and human rights advocacy, for example, a lot of projects against anti-Semitism and racism. But in the course of years, we realized that our projects can be categorized into three big tent areas. One is called private versus public, where we investigate the relationship between state and individual. So we are promoting private solutions or free market alternative to public or statist solutions. We also have another big tent project called Art of Liberty, where we are trying to communicate complex ideas like the negative effects of high taxes via art. For example, short meme-like videos or poems, as there are a lot of classical poets who were classical liberal, but we don't really know of this aspect because it's not taught in school. And we also write children's books under this project. And as I mentioned, we worked a lot on anti-racism and human rights, but also with, for example, regulation. And we realized that there's a clear connection between behaviors that the state is trying to regulate, like alcohol consumption and smoking, and mental health, and also with racism and mental health, because many people might feel ostracized, might feel threatened by minorities and leading them to be racist. There are a lot of fake news and disinformation around, which also has a psychological aspect. And of course, racism itself has a dire effect on the minority group that's being ostracized. So I think this is an interdisciplinary approach that we really like taking, and I think it needs more investigation from our part and from many other NGOs. I think it's a topic that's not really being realized, and we are trying to innovate in a way that innovation is, a process of trial and error, and we are definitely in the trial and a lot of error phase. But we are seeing how we can grow, what sort of projects we can do, implement, and how we can investigate the relationship between a free society and the society with a lot of mental well-being. Because we talk about mental health, but it's not just a question of mental health. So it's not just that you are doing okay, you don't have any serious problems. It's actually a very innovative way that the WHO, of all things, I'm usually very critical of, but it pinpointed a very interesting thing, because for them, health and mental health is not just the lack of some sickness or illness, or health is not just that your body is functioning in pragmatic ways, but it's much more, that you have agency, that you can realize your full potential, that you are resilient to normal amount of stress, and you can realize your life achievements according to your own ability. It doesn't mean that you will be superhuman, but with your own given abilities, you will be able to do it. And it doesn't mean that we have to fix people who are mentally unhealthy, but we have to empower people to be more motivated, to be more resilient, and to be more active and have more agency. And I think that that's an approach that needs to be taken. So people usually meet a mental health professional when they have serious problem, or they usually face the whole topic of mental health when they see a problem among their friends or family or in themselves, but that's usually too late. So in a normal case, people should really care about their mental well-being, as it's preferably called, rather than just mental health. People should care about the mental well-being of their friends and family, and society in general should care about the mental well-being of each individual.
Mate, you shared with me a book published last year, if I remember correctly, titled Fundamental Health, in which you and I assume your wife Veronica contributed a chapter there. It's quite interesting, and it talks very well about your relationship to your wife. I think if my wife wrote an article about mental health issues, she wouldn't write it with me. She probably write it about me, but that's for a different podcast perhaps. But bad jokes aside, and this is related to what you were saying to me in a few minutes ago. One of the things that caught my attention about the chapter, which by the way, I will put a link on the description of the episode so people can read your chapter and the rest of the book. It's quite an interesting book. You talk about early childhood intervention regarding mental health, mental well-being. And you are very explicit of saying that this is some sort of investment in the future. I would like you, if you could expand on this concept, please.
Yes, so thank you very much. First and foremost, the book we have just contributed a chapter into is a project by the great Polish organization called Project Polska, and the ELF, targeting European decision makers. And I was very lucky to have my wife as co-author, because really she is the expert on all things related to early childhood intervention and psychology. I just run projects and try to familiarize myself with the whole thing. But what you mentioned is early childhood intervention as an investment into the future is, as I mentioned, a lot of people will meet mental health professionals, the concept of mental health when there's a problem. Early childhood intervention usually should work in a way that there are no problems. It's a way to help children have more resilience. It's usually not just children in general, but there's a growing number of people diagnosed with a neurodivergence, such as, for example, ASD, that's autism spectrum disorder, which are in some cases categorized as a mental disorder. It's highly debated whether it's just a neurodivergence or a mental health issue. However, there are a lot of comorbidities with these problems, or not they are not really problems, but these states such as autism or ADHD, and for example, anxiety. So many people who don't get the proper treatment or the environment, as for example, an autistic kid will have a lot of anxieties because they won't really know how to act in society, how to behave in a classroom. If teachers are not prepared, the children will be scolded for misbehavior, and they are not really misbehaving. They are just, for example, they have a lot of problems with sensory things, for example, large or very loud sound. And early childhood intervention basically helps people have a better life, help navigate society. And it's an interesting thing because a lot of people are saying that, oh, there are more autistic kids and there are more ADHD kids, and there's a lot of conspiracy theory related to vaccination and the connection between vaccination and autism. However, it's not that there are more kids with autism. It's probably because our diagnostic tools are much better now, and there is probably less stigma on the topic. Still, there's a lot of stigma, but probably less. So it's the professionals are more, and the diagnostic tools are more sensitive. So it's easier to diagnose. And there are two aspects of this that firstly are economic, and secondly are human rights, because there are a lot of people ostracized for having either neurodivergence. They cannot really integrate into society. They are being looked at as weirdos or aggressive. There was a lot of misconception about people with autism are being aggressive, which is not true in general. But also there's an economic issue that a lot of people would be able to study in schools quite well, but they need to have different systems. So I think there's a big fault at the school system in general, that we are still following the old Prussian educational system. And in many cases, the educational system itself is not child-friendly. It's very one-size-fits-all and disciplinarian, when there are a lot of kids who need individualized learning schedules, for example, or individualized curriculum. And that doesn't mean that they don't need to learn things, but sometimes they need a different way to learn things. They should be more lenient and not just sit behind a desk for 45 minutes, because some children will be unable. An average kid would struggle, because it's 45 minutes sitting in one place. I don't think it's helpful for studying. It's a very passive way that you are sitting there and being told what you should know, rather than learning through experiments. But it's afflicting neurodivergent children more. And if they are not doing well in school, and there's a lot of school dropouts among neurodivergent kids because they cannot really function well in schools. There's a lot of bullying, and not only among their peers, but teachers as well. They cannot really learn the subject. They cannot sit through classes. And if they drop out, they won't be able to join the workforce later on. Whereas in a situation where they have individualized learning schedules or individualized education, they can easily learn the same things as others, the same way, not the same way, but the same curricula. They could have the same skills, and they could join the workforce and be a productive part of society. Whereas if they are dropping out from school, you will strip them of the agency, of the financial freedom, that they have their own earnings and don't depend on their family or the state to take care of them. Then they could take care of them. In many cases, not everyone, but there are a lot of people who could take care of themselves and have an earning job and lead a happy and full life with a lot of agency. And I think that's why early intervention is a very important aspect, and it's not really stressed as much as it should be, because later on it's much more difficult to integrate people, because in a lot of cases schools don't really integrate as much as they should, and it causes problems both ways. Because if someone in a not integrated school meets a neurodivergent kid, it would seem like it's a weird kid and we don't know what to do with it, and they won't learn the same things, they won't integrate, and it's not conducive to living in a free and healthy society.
Continuing with the topic of schools, you also written for a media outlet about an interesting connection, or so to speak, between energy drinks and homework. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we work a lot on regulation. For example, we are contributing to the nanny state index, where we try to measure how well or not well government regulations are working on regulating so-called harmful behaviors, for example, smoking or alcohol consumption or sin taxes, for example, on sugars and unhealthy food. And now there's a general trend on a ban on energy drinks for kids. And I understand the concept because minors really shouldn't drink energy drinks as much as they shouldn't smoke and drink alcohol. So I don't think there's any argument there. So it's a measure with the best of intentions, but I'm very skeptical of it working. So in Hungary, for example, there's such a ban. It's a new law. I seem to remember that all politicians, is one of the rare cases when there were no bickering among politicians, but everybody voted yes on the legislation. I'm just very skeptical whether it will work or not, because children cannot drink alcohol, they cannot smoke, and the reality, as we see, is different. There's still a lot of minors purchasing alcohol in some illicit way. They can still get their hands on cigarettes and smoke. It will be a rite of passage. It will be cool to disobey. And there should be more focus on not what children should and shouldn't do, but why they are doing what they are doing. And I think energy drink is such an issue that obviously we agree that children shouldn't drink energy drinks, but there's another side of the question on why they drink. And there are a lot of cases when children, minors, feel a lot of pressure. They feel fatigue and tired, and they need the energy. Obviously, they want to have fun. They want to do activities outside of their duties and school duties. They want to do sports. They want to play computer games, and they feel like they lack the energy. They need to still wake up. Obviously, we're not going to really change the kids' will to play video games and do a lot of free activity as they should. However, I think there are a lot of problems, and what we can change is the school system. School starts way early. When school starts at 8 a.m., it's not really a good thing. I understand it's because parents have to go to work and they usually start around 8, and children will need to be in school. But trying to put things into kids' head at 8 a.m., it's not working really well. Especially with teenagers, they need more sleep. They usually feel more tired. And studies suggest that starting school at around 10 a.m. would be much better. Children would be able to learn much quicker rather than in the first 2 hours of the day. And there's also the problem of homework, which is still a generally accepted practice that teachers give homework. So whenever kids are finally free of school, they go home and they will still have to spend hours doing homework. And homework and practice are obviously not the same thing. So it's a good thing for kids to learn things by practicing, even at home. But by doing a lot of homework, that you just put a lot of pressure on kids, and you also deprive them of a lot of free time. So things like this, of changing the educational system, starting school later, and reconsidering how much homework and what sort of homework you give, or whether you should have fewer classes and practice in school itself rather than deprive them of their free time, could make it much better. There's a lot of academic pressure on kids as is. So a lot of kids are doing sports not only because they want to, but because it will add to their chances of being able to go to university or for their credit points. I think there's a lot of pressure on kids. There's a lot of societal pressure with social media, bullying, and attention spans are obviously dwindling because of digitalization. And I'm not saying these are bad things, or digitalization or social media are bad things, but these are behaviors you won't be able to really change. But what policymakers could affect is the pressure on kids by school. And hopefully it would help children feel more energized and drink fewer energy drinks. Because now I don't know if regulations would work. I think it's relatively a new thing globally that energy drinks are being banned. So a lot of years will have to pass before we see results. I'm just skeptical that it would work, and you will criminalize a behavior again that will also burden the justice system, and I don't think it's a good approach.
What role do you see the private sector playing in favor of mental health issues, mental well-being issues?
It's a very good question, because as I mentioned, I don't think state regulations usually have their desired effects. But the thing is, and the worrying thing is, that there's a mental well-being crisis going on. More and more people feel they are being afflicted by some mental health disorder, whether it's general anxiety, depression. There's a lot of stress around, so it's definitely a topic that needs addressing. As just going back to the energy drinking drinking a lot of coffee in an energy drink can itself cause mental health problems. The private sector, I think, is better suited in solving this problem, because they are big stakeholders in the matter. Because if you're an adult and you are working, now you see businesses are losing a lot of money because of the mental health problems. In the US, a person with depression will be absent from work over 30 days a year because of a mental health problem. In the EU, mental health issues and being absent from work will cost around, I think, 1.6% of the GDP in the EU. All around mental health crisis cost around 4% of the GDP. So there are clear economic downsides of not trying to mitigate this. However, if you invest into addressing the mental health crisis, according to the WHO, every dollar you invest will have a $4 return. So it's a giant return of investment. Businesses should take care of their employees, because it would be mutually beneficial to address mental health problems. However, most of the managers and CEOs are ill-suited to talk about these issues. It's sort of a taboo. It's being stigmatized. So I think there needs to be more sensitivity. There should be more mental health literacy, as it's called, because employees would obviously have more well-being and businesses would financially benefit from it. But we usually talk about all the bad things that digitalization and new technologies are afflicting to mental health, as social media can cause more anxiety, because people usually post that they are on holiday with their happy children and dogs and sunshine, happiness, prosperity, whereas it's just a single slice of their lives, and on average they are doing exactly the same as you, but you will see that people are so much better. You will feel envy and anxiety that you are not doing better. So it can cause a lot of problems. We are not going to change it. Is the way that we use social media. I don't think it's up to businesses to try to mitigate it. However, there are a lot of innovations that are doing a lot for mental health. For example, just wearable devices like Apple Watches or fitness wearables are doing a great job, because at first people or businesses didn't really figure out what they would do. They just announced the Apple Watch. It was great. You could start and stop your music, answer calls, see the time. But for example, Apple started to focus more and more on health. And it's not really an innovative approach, and it's not a new approach, at least in itself, because there were watches that had, for example, step counting in it, or they could measure your heart rate. But the way it works is that there are a lot of measurements and there's a lot of data, and the data can give you a lot of feedback. For example, a high resting heart rate can indicate stress. So a wearable can just suggest that you should, acknowledge that you are probably more stressful, take a deep breath. There are breathing exercises. So there are a lot of good things that wearables are doing, also in raising awareness that this stress is a measurable thing and a problem. So you're not just saying that you are stressed, but you can actually measure it through your heart rate, for example. But there's also a lot of other things. For example, the fintech revolution of just the whole concept of finances as for example, double bookkeeping was such a novel idea during the Renaissance, that you can have profits and you can lose money, and there's a balance sheet and it should be more than zero, and thus you have profits. And people with a lot of financial literacy will use a budgeting app. They will put in their incomes and expenses, which helps with your budgeting. But also these apps now, there are apps that will, using artificial intelligence and machine learning, will see your spending trends, and spending trends can indicate mental health changes. And it's an early, not really a diagnostic tool, but it's an early indicator of there might be some problem. For example, with people with bipolar disorder, when they are in a manic state, there's a trend that some people spend more. So it could indicate for people afflicted with bipolar disorder that their mental state is changing. So these could be indicators. And also it's interesting, just the concept of AI, because a lot of people and a lot of psychiatrists are now recommending using chatbots that people in crisis can talk to. Obviously, there are crisis hotlines, and people in real crisis should call the hotline. But if you don't feel that you are in such a dire need of calling a hotline, but you are alone at, 2 a.m. in the morning, and you feel a lot of anxiety, you could chat with an AI chatbot. It will tell you that there are specially designed chatbots for that. They can tell you that it's okay. Other people feel the same way. They are healthcare professionals you could go to, and it will get you through the immediate crisis until the point that you will find a mental health professional. Because, for example, there are inconvenient times like 2 a.m. in the morning where you will be hard pushed to find someone. Obviously, you should, if you are in a real crisis, and go to the hospital. But these are small things that are changing. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to do it 10 years ago. You would call someone, but if you are feeling lonely, and loneliness is a real problem as well, and you want to bother someone at 2 a.m. in the morning, you don't feel like your crisis is big enough to call someone or call a professional, or the crisis is so big that you are not seeking professional help, but trying to solve it yourself because of, for example, stigmatization. Now, talking to someone in whom the trust is bigger than an actual person, because if you go to a mental health professional, there should be mutual trust, that you should trust this person to talk about really sensitive topics. However, you might be able to trust something that's not a person who won't judge you. So it's an interesting thing, because you will feel less judged by an AI, a machine, than by a person. So you can start chatting and start your journey to mental well-being, and be suggested a professional later on. So I think there are a lot of great examples of innovations that could help mental health. But also I think that it's not just new technologies, but reverting to old technologies that are really helpful. For example, one of the big problems today is that more and more, it's not a problem, it's a fact that more and more people are living in cities. However, cities affect your mental well-being quite harshly. So your chances of developing an anxiety disorder or depression or psychosis are increasing a lot, if you just by the fact that you're living in cities, because you won't really know your neighbors. There won't be such a community as in, for example, smaller areas where people need to depend on each other more. There will be more noise pollution, air pollution, less greenery. And I think there are very simple solutions to this. For example, trying to solve the problem of commute, that there should be no traffic jams. It's easier said than done, obviously, but city planners should really keep this in mind. There should be more greenery, and not just trees as such, but biodiversity. And an interesting thing is birdsong, and hearing different sorts of birds can actually improve your mental well-being, as well as, for example, the cleaner air. And there's a concept of the 15-minute city, that everything should be in reach within 15 minutes for you, all administration, shops, recreational areas. So it would be much more convenient, and you don't have to commute, because it will cause a lot of stress. So, and for example, just reading books and reading science fiction could actually help your mental health, because it's a way of fleeing reality. So if something is really bothering you in reality, you don't need to take drugs to get into another world, but you can just take a book and read a book and read sci-fi and learn different approaches, and it actually been measured that it's an effective way of building more resilience, mental resilience. And also because we live in an on-demand society, everything is on your doorstep, which is great. I sit in a room with controlled temperature, I have air conditioning, I can order food, and I can get everything within 20 minutes. But it also has the effect that my attention span and everyone's attention span is a bit lower than it used to be. If I start watching a movie and I don't like it, I just skip it and watch another one. When years ago you still had to consider what you would like to take from the video store and stuck with it. So I think there's also the fact that we don't really live in the moment anymore. That you will think of, oh, what I should have done, what I will have to do in my job, and you don't really focus on the moment. So wearables try to mitigate this by, if they see that your stress level is up, that you should sit down and there will be a suggested breathing exercise. The breathing exercise itself is interesting because it's not just the fact that you are getting oxygen, but that you are counting for 5 seconds that you're breathing in, counting for 5 seconds to breathe out, and you will focus on the breathing and not focus on anything else. And I think there are a lot of activities that we used to do that needed your focus more than it needs your focus now. For example, and I'm not saying people are not cooking anymore, but you can easily get cheap food when you are ordering food. But when you are in a kitchen cooking, you really have to pay attention. Otherwise, you will mess up your cooking or burn the kitchen. So you really have to focus on one thing. And while you're focusing on one thing, your attention will not go to other disturbing thoughts that will cause you anxiety. Or for example, just the fact that you are singing, and it's been done in militaries in ancient times, that before a battle they were singing the battle song or something, because when you're singing you will have less anxiety, because it will take certain parts of the brain and refocus it to singing. So there are very old tricks that, because of the comfort we are now living, are being really phased out, because it's the behavior are changing. And it's not a problem that they are changing, it's just a fact. But we should not forget that there are things that could help you stay in focus in the moment, because they can help a lot. Obviously, it helps to have new innovation as well, but we shouldn't forget the old ways.
Mate, playing a little bit of devil's advocate, if mental health is becoming the quote unquote new physical health in terms of public discourse and in terms of how things are perceived, how society operates to a certain extent, could we be running the risk of starting to medicalize normal human experiences and behaviors? Could we, let's say, because I think there could be a trend of try to pathologize everything. How do you see that? Do you see this as a problem? How would you find the balance there?
Yeah, so it is a problem, and as I said, I tend to agree with the definition of mental health and health is being more than just the absence of disease. It's something that's related to well-being. However, it's criticized, and justly so, for not really being measurable. And it's a problem. I like the trend that you define health as something more than the lack of sickness, and it's not just that your body is a utilitarian thing and it works properly, but it's something more. I think we are it's a relatively new concept, and as with innovation, as I said, there's a trial and error. I think there should be improvement on the whole concept of health and mental health. It should be more measured, and that's the case with mental health as well. I think there should be more diagnostic measures on mental health as well, not just you go to a shrink and he or she will look at you and talk to you, do some projective tests, because that would be a bit arbitrarily. That these are people also have good and bad days. You might have the chemistry, you might not. There might be a lot of misdiagnosis. it's not that you go into have a blood test and see what sort of viruses or bacteria you have. It will be more of a hit and miss in many cases what you're being diagnosed. Projective tests work on average, but they will be those that they are not working for. And I think there should be more and more diagnostic tools. And I think the technology is very, very good and developing quickly on there are a lot of neurological tests that you can do. MRI, for example, that's a great tool, or blood test that can measure the hormone levels. So there are a lot of indicators. Obviously, they are on the more expensive side, and also here I would advocate for privatization, because in many cases it's expensive because hospitals are lacking funds, and obviously MRIs are being in high demand, but there's a lot of people, and probably mental health won't be the first thing to merit an MRI scan. So there are these sort of problems, and with medication, there are usually trends. In the US, there are, for example, many people were not really diagnosed, but were given medicine for ADHD. We don't really know if it was merited or not. They are usually fashionable diseases or problems or things to give medicine to. The thing with mental health medication is sometimes it's very necessary to give you a better life and to mitigate problems, but sometimes it's just a palliative care, and it should never only focus on medicine. Medicine can get you to a certain level where you can be able to develop resilience and go to a therapist. So, for example, if you have severe anxiety, you are not really willing to go out even on the streets. It's then really difficult for you to go to a clinic, sit in the waiting room with other people where you are terrified, and talk to a complete stranger. You will need probably some medication to calm you down to be able to go out. Now, it's much easier because we have video calls, and obviously you can video call. However, obviously doctors would prefer in-person session, or occasionally, because they will be able to monitor your gestures, your things much better than over the screen. So I don't think there should be a over-reliance on medication. Now, everybody takes medication for everything. It's good that it's so accessible, but there should not be a reliance on it solely. There should be therapy. There's a varied and a myriad number of therapies, and there's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Some professionals will advocate for this, others for that, but it's a two-way street. You'll have to see for yourself whichever works for you. But I think the main thing is not to get into a situation where you would need medication. Your mental health is the same as your physical health. You should really take care of it, so that the point is not to get into a state where you have to go to a doctor. So you have to exercise just for your mental health as well as your physical health. You should take care of your mind and your body as well. Obviously, there are errors and problems. There are countries where you can have a lot of government-mandated sick leave. Obviously, businesses will lose a lot of money because of it. There can be people who exploit this system, just because sometimes you go into a doctor and say that, okay, I feel down and I feel depressed, and people might be able to exploit it. I think with the advancing of technologies and better diagnostics and better understanding of all things related to mind and mental health, these will be less and less so. But I think the regulatory environment also needs to consider this as well. So there should be, governments are usually slow to react on new scientific advances. So, and people, as I said, could exploit mental health issues just because they are so abstract and less measurable still, or less cost effective to measure than other ailments, like having a physical chronic disease, which would be more obvious and apparent and more cheaply diagnosed. That I think government should try to regulate the labor code less and we should focus more on the relationship between businesses and the individuals on solving this problem, because both would benefit. I'm not saying right now people realize this. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of illiteracy as it comes to when it comes to mental health. But I think the trend should be that there should be more mental health education, whether it's private or public. I think in schools it should not be a taboo, or even societies or communities. It should. You don't really mention that you're not feeling well. You just ask how you are doing, and usually people say fine. And when people say they are, no, I really feel down, the other party will feel uncomfortable. And that's understandable, but it's still problematic that when you have a flu, you can say that, oh, I had a flu and I was really down for a couple of days. But when you are depressed, you don't usually just say that, oh, I was depressed. And it's a problem that there's a lot of stigma and taboo. And when it changes, I think we can have a better conversation on how it could work better for businesses, for schools, for the individual, and for healthcare. And obviously, just throwing medicine at it won't really solve the problem, just because it's not that sort of a disease. Sometimes it helps mitigate the symptoms. Sometimes it helps you go to a doctor or live a better life. But usually there will be more needed therapy or just another solution needed for you to get better.
You're very passionate about this topic, also very knowledgeable. On the other hand, you're also the director of the Free Market Foundation. So my last question to you is the following. If you had to choose between, let's say, fixing the mental health crisis that you said we were going through, and I fully agree, or achieving perfect economic freedom, what would you pick?
I would try to not answer. I will answer the question, but I think it will be the boring answer. But I think these are not mutually exclusive. I really think that in a society where there is more mental resilience, the economy is better and freer. And in a freer economy, you have better mental health. And for example, just a lot of people are afraid of failure. And that's a sort of anxiety. You are very anxious that what if I fail? What the others would think of me? And this is a huge barrier for enterprise. Around more than 40% of people are afraid to take action to enterprise, for example, because what if they fail? They have these what if questions are usually these are the ones that are nagging in the back of your head. They are, what if I do this? What I should have done? People with depression, for example, have these nagging questions all the time, or people with anxiety, and this is a barrier to enterprise. And we need enterprise and we need failure in order to succeed. I don't think there was a lot of people who set up doing something and didn't fail, but knew the first time what they should do and never failed. I don't think it's healthy. Anyhow, I think failure is a very, very important lesson and a very important part of our lives. As I said time and time again, that innovation is basically just based on trial and error, but error needs to be there. Error shows you what not to do. You will try to do something else. Machine learning basically works in a way that the machine will try to do something and fail and fail and fail and fail up until it succeeds. Then it will know the model, succeed, and do the next step. Fail, and then succeed. We should be able to embrace this, and we should not be afraid of failure. Failure is a part of life. I really like the example. There's one YouTuber, originally a Swedish girl whose name I will not try to pronounce and butcher it, but she was, I think, called the queen of shitty robots. She made weird contraptions and robots and basically botched it up and failed. And she capitalized on that it was a very funny thing, but she also raised awareness to trying and be entrepreneurial and try to build other machines. It will be funny. And she ended up moving to the US, and she's a very successful YouTuber, inspiring a lot of people and women on why they should also try to tinker. Don't be afraid of failure. And I think it's a very important lesson that you should be able to fail in order to succeed. And I think it's a mental health question, but also an economic question, because you should try. You should always try. You should never not try because you're afraid of failure. If you don't try, you will never succeed. So I think a free economy will help people with mental health. There will be more options for going to a mental health clinic. There will be competition. Competition will drive innovation. Innovation will help the individual, and healthcare and medical solutions will also improve. So I think that's what you mentioned, a perfect economy will increase our well-being, whether physical or mental. But in order to have a free economy, you will need to have mental well-being. And that's not just mental health, but you will need to be motivated, not be afraid of failure. You will need to have the energy, and you will need to have the entrepreneurial mindset and be creative and have the agency to enterprise. So what I would prefer over the other, I don't really have an answer to this, unfortunately. I think it all goes hand in hand, that mentally more resilient and people with more mental well-being would succeed more in economy, and a freer economy would help people who are struggling.
Máté, thank you very much for your time and for the amazing work that you're doing with the Free Market Foundation. Really, I think this approach that you're given to part of your work is extremely innovative. It's really very much needed. And I think the Free Market Foundation and yourself are one of the pioneers doing this. And really, it's been a pleasure listening to you. Hopefully, there will be opportunities in the future to keep on talking on these topics and others. For everyone who listen to us or watch us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. You can find our podcast on whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. You can also, of course, find us on YouTube to see videos such as this one and others that we produce with Somos Innovación and We Are Innovation. And we meet again in the next episode of the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thanks for watching this episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To know more about We Are Innovation, visit weareinnovation.global.